Welcome to the Dynamics Mechanics Podcast, Episode 7, Understanding the Instant Dynamics Developer Fallacy. Thank you for joining me on the Dynamics Mechanics Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Smith, the Dynamics Mechanic. This is the Dynamics 365 Strategy Podcast, where we discuss implementing software systems using the Microsoft Business Applications Platform. It's where I give you the strategies and teach you the techniques I learned in my experience as a delivery architect at Microsoft.
This episode is brought to you by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integrations affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 80 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. And KingswaySoft now fully works with CDS and Power Apps.
In this episode, I want to talk to you about something that I've seen more than once, and I probably will continue seeing it in the future. And that is the concept of, I'm just going to take a bunch of .NET developers and put them on my Dynamics project, and everything will be great because I just want to save money, and they're all developers anyway, right? Wink, wink. And this is definitely not the case. In fact, the systems that I work on that have the most problems tend to be systems that were built by .NET developers. And I know that sounds kind of ironic in a way, but the fact is, being a developer, a Dynamics developer, having development skills is merely a prerequisite to building dynamic solutions. It is not the be-all, end-all of how to build systems. And that's where the crux of the problem kind of lies. So I had a customer once that I came in and I did kind of a little demo of what Dynamics can do, and we built a little kind of POC project, and I had assumed that I did such a great job that he was going to hire Microsoft Consulting to come in and do the job, but he ended up getting a bunch of .NET developers, I guess to save a buck or two, because, you know, it's not like Microsoft is cheap, but the end result was not great because you had a bunch of people that while they knew how to write code, they did not know how to build a Dynamics system. And that's just I had another project as well where we were developing a system, but I was given a team that was pretty much new to the platform. And, you know, when you're running a team of 12, it's kind of challenging to, on top of that, I had my own workload, which I don't recommend. So if you have a project and you have a technical lead, don't go and assign him all the same amount of work as everybody else, because then he can't really do his kind of technical lead duties. But anyway, in this particular case, I did not have kind of enough time in leeway to really sit down with everybody and kind of go over the work that they were doing, kind of like a peer review style, development methodology. And so I just kind of I helped people where I could, and I certainly encouraged them to come and ask me questions if they needed it, but I simply didn't have the time to go and kind of sit down and give everybody the personal attention that I usually would. And as you would expect, we ended up with some code, a lot of code that basically you could say it worked and maybe it passed the functional testing. But at the end of the day, it was some rancid code. I'm just saying it was bad, but it worked. It sort of worked, or it looked like it worked. It certainly wouldn't scale the way it was written, but it was written in a way that a .NET developer would write code. And how can you blame a .NET developer for doing their .NET thing? It's just the fact that the reality is that Dynamics 365 is a platform, and it has its own identity and it has its own way of achieving outcomes. And if you don't know what those capabilities and features are, as a developer, you're going to resort to code for everything. And you see that a lot. Is sometimes, you see projects where there's a bunch of code written and you're like, there's a feature for that, right? It's called XYZ or whatever, right? And they're like, oh, wow, no, I didn't know that. Yeah. And you guys just spent like 2 weeks writing code for something that's already built in. That's happened to me before. But knowing how to code, like I said, it's just a technical prerequisite for creating customizations. It is not everything you need to know, but a lot of customers, especially non-technical business stakeholders, will assume that a developer is a developer, right? It doesn't matter what the technology is. It's not like, there's a learning curve to learning how Dynamics works. And so it's a very challenging and stressful thing to place a .NET project team in a situation where they have to create a dynamic system and expect that you're going to get a good outcome. A lot of times these guys, just to survive the politics and everything else, they're just going to hack away. They're basically just going to hack stuff into that system. They're going to get it to work somehow, some way. And, along the way, they may do some things right. But at the same time, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. And if there's no architectural guidance from a platform architect, then you're just asking for trouble, and it's just going to get you to a place where when you go live, even if you get to go live, you're probably, as long as you're not dealing with like an enterprise system, you might be able to get away with it. But if you're dealing with enterprise, then I'm sorry for you. Maybe we'll talk later. But it's a mistake to assume all developers can instantly be productive on Dynamics projects. And even projects where we had a Dynamics team and the customer decided to add .NET resources, there was still a learning curve that they had to go through before they really became productive team members. And it helped to be around other Dynamics team members, of course. But the fact is, it did slow us down in that we had to kind of pick up the slack and answer a lot of questions. By all means, I definitely would encourage customers to include their developers as part of the project team because, one day that consulting firm is going to leave and someone's going to have to support that application. So I'm not trying to imply that .NET developers shouldn't be part of the team. They certainly should, but realize that learning curve will be there. But that is probably one of your best things that you could do as a customer is definitely include your team in the build of the project. And, what happens when customers use their own developers is the project teams feel stressed out. As far as when I say their own developers, I mean they are building a dynamic system on their own with no outside help, no guidance whatsoever. The team will typically feel very stressed out. The platform ignorance will definitely cause a lot of over customization in situations where there may have been an easy fix or an easy configuration that could have happened, and the system most likely will not perform under load. And that's really the big one that you have to watch out for. I can tell you this from experience because when I first started with Dynamics myself, my very first project, we were an all .NET developer team. And basically I sat there and someone threw a book on my desk and they said, oh yeah, here's CRM 4.0, go learn it. And by the way, we want all our features done in the next, 4 weeks. That was lots of fun. And the other consequence of when you have a pure .NET developer team on a Dynamics project is you end up with a Dynamics system that's built like a .NET application. And that's simply not how you go about building Dynamics systems. Granted, yes, we're using .NET technology, but it's different than a custom application that you would write. Certainly, there's a lot of things that you don't have to do because it's a platform. And there's certain behaviors and opinions that Dynamics has about how you do things. And if you don't do some things the right way, the platform will not like you and it will give you problems. Another kind of consequence of a pure .NET developer, design is often these systems are challenging to upgrade and certainly challenging to migrate to the cloud. You often have to do a lot of refactoring of interfaces and especially integrations that are built. And so here's the thing. Every developer, and hey, I can admit it myself. I've had a lot of challenges with developers that want to go straight to the database and grab data out of the SQL tables. And I have to fight them every time. And, sometimes I get added to projects after the fact, after this has already happened. I've had quite a debate or two with .NET developers who said, hey, it's going to be a lot faster if I can just go right to the database. Why should I go through these API calls? And, this is while I was at Microsoft. And I said, well, one of the promises that Microsoft makes is that the system will always be upgradable. And by you going and querying tables directly, your integration may break if they decide to change those tables. And, it also might make things a little harder when you go to upgrade or especially go to the cloud. So I think, Mr. Developer, that you should do it the right way. There's different styles of architecture that we can use to mitigate the performance challenges you may think you're going to have. And we can certainly talk about that. But I am going to have to tell you that I don't think that you should be doing this, even for what you consider to be like a short-term fix or something like that. Because as we know as developers, short-term fixes end up going to production and staying in production for years. So it's best that we just don't even go there and do things the right way the first time. The last consequence I want to talk about is the buildup of technical debt. And the technical debt is definitely a consequence of just not knowing how to build and design things for a Dynamics platform system that, as the shortcuts are taken or direct database access happens in plugins and other components, we just have to take a step back at some point when, maybe I get on this project or you get on this project and you see a bunch of stuff that maybe it quote unquote works, but it's not great. And it's certainly not, no one wants to touch that stuff, right? It's kind of like the moment you touch something, you kind of own it, especially if you're like a consulting firm and you come in and you're taking over a project from another firm, and it can be kind of scary when you go in and touch some code when it's so brittle. It's kind of like what's that game with the blocks where you pile all the blocks up, and if you take one out, like the whole thing falls down. That's kind of how it seems like when you're dealing with someone else's code base, and the code is just designed in a way that is so brittle that if you poke it the wrong way, things just break. And then the customer is pointing their fingers at you and they're like, hey, this was working before you came and now you broke it. Now I want you to fix it all. And then, it just is not a great situation. So anyway, here I'd like to talk about my guidelines for how you solve this problem or how you mitigate the .NET developer fallacy or syndrome, if you want to call it that, in your project. So the first thing I would say is, one of the first solutions is you could hire a consulting partner to come in and do the work for you. Obviously, this is a not least expensive option, but it certainly brings in the expertise that you would want to have in order to be successful. It's kind of like if you were, say like me, and tried to do your own housework, for example. I can tell you right now, on my last house, I thought I would save a few bucks by doing it myself. And let's just say the work took 3 times longer and the quality just wasn't as good as a professional that knew how to do those things. And I tried to do everything. And I can tell you right now, I hate painting painting is like, it's the worst thing. And I always paint over the lines and I mess it all up. So that's one thing that, hey, I'm just going to outsource that. Why should I go through the pain and suffering of doing that? Now, granted, every consulting company should eventually leave. If you keep them in-house for years and years and years, that's, that's one way to go. But you're definitely going to want to bring up your own kind of developers in-house to learn how to do all those things. But anyway, hiring a consulting partner is definitely a way to go. Another route you could go is you could hire an expert advisor. So let's say you have your .NET developer team in-house and they're working on a system. The next cheaper route would be to hire somebody that can perform the kind of like architectural reviews and code reviews and such, and give advice on design considerations. And this is someone that, maybe you pay them on a retainer or whatever. Just having that person that you can reach out to or that your team can reach out to when they have questions on how to do create a certain feature or do something, I think that is definitely going to be invaluable. And that's kind of like a bridge between hiring a consulting team, which is going to be more expensive, as opposed to using your own in-house developers. And hey, I get it, right? It's like, I think it's, you already have like a bunch of full-time, developers that are employees. And if, they have the bandwidth, I say, get them in, and, get an advisor and kind of go at it from that perspective. You can still utilize and not spend as much money, utilize your existing human resources, but you do have to invest in them, certainly, if you want to have the kind of outcome that you're going to smile about and not be sitting in a meeting room somewhere with your triple skip manager asking why things are gone so bad. And, as far as that goes with your own developers, obviously educational resources is something that is important for your team. And I would definitely advise you to do everything you can to get your people educated and up to speed on Dynamics as a platform, and even the Microsoft platform in general. The platform over the years, back in the day, like CRM 4, CRM 2011, it was kind of like its own thing, and you didn't have to learn that much of other things in order to create a system. You just basically figured out, okay, here's how I write a plugin, here's how I write a custom workflow assembly. Okay, we can create workflows in Dynamics. Okay, we can create entities, views, la-da-da-da. Now it's like, oh my goodness, it's like we exploded into Dynamics universe here, and we've got SharePoint, we got Office 365, we've got Azure, we've got all this stuff. Even now, okay, we got Power Apps, we've got Flow, we've got Power BI, and here's the thing: it's all great. It's great that to have options, but it is a big thing to conceptualize in your head, certainly too big for one person to be an expert in everything. So I would say you need to definitely invest in educational resources. And so since I said that, let's talk about some of these things. One place or two places that obviously a lot of developers know about is Pluralsight.com. And Pluralsight is great from the standpoint of they have a lot of broad spectrum courses on different development topics. Now, they don't have an in-depth set of courses on Dynamics, but they do have Mr. David Yak's plugin courses, which are fully relevant today just as much as they were. They're a little bit older, but if you're new to plugin development, I would highly suggest those. They're very relevant and they're very in-depth. There's like hours of plugin training there. Certainly worth the price of admission to Pluralsight. The other place you can go is LinkedIn Learning, which, aka lynda.com. is another place. They have a lot of content, kind of, it seems more broad than Pluralsight is like more for developers, whereas Lynda or LinkedIn Learning right now, it's still sort of more kind of lends itself to the creative types like photography and things like that. They've been stepping up, and they do have a lot of courses on software development and other things that would pertain to a Dynamics implementation. Like C# stuff and things like that. But I would say it's a little bit weaker in the development aspect of education as opposed to Pluralsight, but still definitely valuable. I'm a LinkedIn Premium member, so I get access to all that great stuff over there. Another website by my buddy David Yak is 365.training, and that's the website. Yeah, 365.training. And he started that, and he's got a few things out there, definitely a few things that are being offered for free, and you can certainly check that out. The other thing is Microsoft Learn, the new educational website that Microsoft has launched, supposedly in partnership with Pluralsight. It seems like what they're doing is they're trying to get a lot of educational content out there in order to help increase adoption across the industry for a lot of the Microsoft technologies. And there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's all free. And certainly I would say that's probably a great resource that you can take advantage of. Speaking of education, if you happen to need to learn how to write client-side JavaScript, my buddy Mitch Millam has a JavaScript course where he teaches you all the ins and outs of writing JavaScript. And I think you should really check that out. And by the way, if you happen to be interested in how to build projects, you can certainly check out Neil Benson's Scrum course, Introduction to Scrum. And that's another resource that can help you in your Dynamics journey to creating a successful project outcome. And last but not least, I also have a performance course that I've created in case you ever have a situation where you might have a performance challenge, or you just want to know how to not have performance challenges. Certainly check that out as well. Other resources that you can resort to online is social media. So for example, YouTube has quite a bit of content scattered about. It's kind of like roaming through a messy room where you're looking for a certain piece of clothing. It's there, but it's somewhere, and you can search around it. Now, granted, there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube. The commercials kind of irritate me a little bit, but anyway, there's definitely good content out there that you can certainly find to help educate your team. The other thing you can do certainly is the blogs. The community blogs are pretty broad spectrum. They cover an array of topics. Now, the thing about the blogs, of course, is they tend to lend themselves more to research of problems as opposed to learning the platform. There's certainly blogs out there that people are writing that will help from an educational standpoint, including my own blog is actually more focused on strategic aspects of building dynamic systems as opposed to the more tactical hey, if you change this line of code, it fixes this problem kind of thing. But the blogs are definitely a good way to help educate your team. And finally, of course, podcasts, kind of like this one. The Serenum Audio Podcast Network has a host of shows. As you probably know, if you're listening to this right now, you can certainly listen to or encourage your team to listen to the podcasts that are being created here by various folks on different topics. Certainly will help the educational process move along. The last thing I would like to mention as far as educational resources that I find helpful is Channel 9, the Microsoft MSDN Channel 9 network, where they put out a lot of different videos, and they have shows on Azure and all kinds of other things. Certainly great content there to help build your team's knowledge base. Now, granted, I don't see too much stuff when it comes to Dynamics specifically on Channel 9. It seems like it's kind of more catered to kind of the other platforms like Azure, for example. Azure has definitely a lot of content, but it will help your team when it comes to Azure-centric tasks, but it's not really going to teach them Dynamics. And of course, books, right? Books are definitely a great resource. I like the tactile feedback of having a book in my hand, even though I got rid of all my books anyway. But, no, I do have some books, but I've kind of gone the digital route, and it's not as great, but I kind of like not carrying 50 books around with me everywhere. But there are certainly books on the Dynamics platform. The thing to kind of keep in mind when it comes to books is you might think, oh, let me look for a Dynamics 365 book, and that's the only book that matters. I can't look at any other book. But if you look at, for example, some of the later books, even on as far back as Dynamics 2013 or 15, a lot of the content is actually still very relevant today. There's certainly new things that have been added or changed, but I would say that the majority of the material is still very relevant to learning dynamics. So I think that I don't think you should be shy about potentially buying a book that isn't necessarily a 365 book. There are some out there, but a lot of the great books are kind of some of the older ones, maybe even like 2016. If your goal is to learn the platform, not necessarily be an expert in all the latest features, if it's to learn the platform, then that's certainly something that you can do. And then, last but not least, events, right? You can send your team to events like Microsoft Ignite is the big event that Microsoft puts on, and there's a lot of sessions for Dynamics there. And the next one coming up is going to be in Orlando. And then, of course, there's the CRM User Group Conference. That's another great place, especially if you're a beginner to the platform. There's a lot of content there that is being presented by MVPs and such that I think would be very valuable to any team that is looking to kind of get up to speed. The last thing I'm going to mention is in Joel's CRM Audio podcast, episode 103, he was talking about the solution checker. And the solution checker was created by Microsoft, and it basically does a code scan through your solution, and it will look at JavaScript and plugin code and look for patterns where things need to be fixed, or they're using deprecated APIs or anything like that. And by using the solution checker, which it's in public preview right now, but it's going to be released at some point in next year, you can just run this code checker and check to see if anything pops out in the report. And that can definitely be helpful for trying to keep your team tidy on as far as coding practice, but also catch things before they actually go to production. And like I said, that was in CRM Audio episode 103. Go ahead and check that out, where Joel does the full interview with Angus Haney, the senior program manager at Microsoft who works on that team. But anyway, I hope that this has been educational in the sense that I kind of reviewed why you don't necessarily want to just have a full .NET development team working on your project and not have any kind of other advisory or consulting from another partner. It's definitely a big risk to do it that way. You certainly can, and you can certainly take the risk. Even if you have hotshot developers, I would say that the learning curve can be a little hard if you have to learn the platform and produce results fast for an aggressive timeline. So I would advise either getting with a consulting partner or hiring somebody or something somebody that is an expert in Dynamics and is able to at least give you architectural advice and potentially do code reviews just to make sure that everything's tidy as you go about your journey. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dynamics Mechanics Podcast. Feel free to reach out and connect with me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen Smith CRM, and that's STEPHAN. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Stephen Smith CRM as well. And feel free to check out my website, and that's dynamicsmechanics.com. Thank you.